Welcome to the podcast today. My name is Douglas Gabriel. Today, I'd like to talk to you about an article that we just finished called The Incarnations of Lucifer and Ahriman. Now, this topic is very near and dear to my heart because I've studied it for decades, but in fact, it is one of the most controversial topics that anyone can discuss concerning the works of Rudolf Steiner and his teachings called Anthroposophy. Rudolf Steiner talked about different forms of evil that are assaulting people today. And because of the apocalyptic times that we are living in fact, it looks as if we are in the war of all against all. We thought that it would be very important to address this topic and to attempt not to be the final word or to clear up the confusion concerning the incarnations of Lucifer in China and Ahriman here in the West, but to put it in perspective so that you yourself can make an informed decision about what it is you think about it. So we put together an article taking many of the quotes of Rudolf Steiner from the influences of Lucifer and Ahriman and of a variety of lectures. And we put them together so that you could then look at the exact words. We put them together so that you could look at the exact words of Rudolf Steiner concerning this particular topic. Now, the first thing that you're going to notice is that there are incongruencies in what Rudolf Steiner has said. And this is the cause of a lot of the confusion. So let me just address a few of those incongruencies. First off, most of the remarks Rudolf Steiner made about the incarnation of Ahriman, in a minute I'll describe who Lucifer and Ahriman and the Asuras are, but this being Ahriman, this ancient Persian name, which was very much in vogue at the time of Ralph Waldo Emerson. As a matter of fact, Emerson referred to Ahriman all the time. The scleroticizing, dying, death forces that overcome someone, that can keep you from having clear thinking, that can keep you suppressed, that can steal your willpower, that can, in fact, bring to you what would be basically called the lies of the father of lies, of Satan. So some would confuse Ahriman with the being Satan, but Rudolf Steiner makes a very clear distinction between Lucifer, the being that we hear about in the ancient texts, particularly the Old Testament and in the book of Revelation, and Lucifer being cast down to the earth. Everyone knows that story. As a matter of fact, the archangel Michael is seen holding back and holding at bay and taming this dragon, this evil demon that we would call Lucifer. So that being we know a little bit about. But the being of Ahriman was never really found to be described in the Bible, nor was it described in many other places besides Emerson and Rudolf Steiner. So when we hear many anecdotal remarks about people who spoke to Steiner about when this being Ahriman would incarnate, when and where and how and under what auspices and what would be the earmarks of it, we only have some indications. And those indications have confused people so much that there's hardly a week goes by on Facebook where anthroposophists aren't debating this topic very hotly. And they really believe, individual anthroposophists and students of Rudolf Steiner, that their version of it is the correct version. I'm not sure there is a correct version of it. So I'm going to give you an overview of that, and I'm going to start with Ahriman because that's the thing closest to us here, particularly in the West, because Ahriman is the being of materialism. In the ancient Persian times, Ahriman was the being called Angrimanu, many varieties of ways of saying that and many different versions of that name, but it was the being of darkness, of death, of the earth that confronted and was in a battle with the beings of light. So Ahriman was darkness, and the being Ahura Mazda, the being of the sun, who many would now call Christ or the solar deity, Christ working through the solar forces of the combined seven Elohim, the beings of form on the sun, were in a battle in ancient Persia. And this is the ancient Persia that goes beyond what we know of the historical Persia. And Zarathustra was the person who brought forth, with the Zendavesta and the many teachings of the ancient Persians, this vision of Ahriman fighting with the descending being of the sun, the solar being, and that is who we would now acknowledge was the being of Christ that embodied Jesus of Nazareth for 3 years and became Jesus Christ. We also acknowledge in most religions, mythologies, and most uh, thinkers and philosophers that there's a part of us that is like the sun. It can be found in the human heart, and it is that part that we would call the indomitable I am, the ego, the higher ego of the human self, the individuality, the intellectual capacity of each individual. So this battle is very close to us, and it's raging in us as we speak. Now, Rudolf Steiner points out, and we highlight that in the articles, that around 1415 or in the 15th century, materialism really came to roost here on the earth, and that there was, in fact, a battle in heaven. Once again, the kind of battle where we are told Lucifer was thrown down from heaven to the earth, and as a dragon in the book of Revelations, his tail sweeps up 1/3 of the beings, in other words, 1/3 of humanity, and bring them to the earth, and here he is the prince of this earth. Well, that's Lucifer. But we must separate out these concepts. Lucifer was, in fact, the highest of the angels and was standing before the throne of God, but his pride made him believe that he could be as powerful as God and that he could sit on the throne of God. This is the greatest hubris of all history. That is also in us. That's one aspect of our own being. But then this being of darkness, this being of death, the being of absolute cruelty, the being who wishes to basically kill and steal the souls and spirits of every human being that lives on the earth, that is Ahriman. But there's evil even beyond that, which I'll describe in just a second. So when we talk about Ahriman, this being of darkness, we need to realize that when Rudolf Steiner said in anecdotal remarks that this being would incarnate in a physical human body in the West, not sure exactly what that means, and that not a day of the second millennium AD would go by that Ahriman would not be incarnated in the West. Well, that means that literally the devil is taking on a human form. Now, this might be called, in many people's minds, the Antichrist. But remember that the reference to the Antichrist go all the way back to the Old Testament and all the way up to the book of Revelation. There are many Antichrists. And anyone who stands against the human I am and tries to steal it, tries to degrade it, tries to pull it down into darkness would be an Antichrist. But there is also a specific being who is the counter being to the solar being of Christ, who works through the seven Elohim, which is the hierarchical rank above the archai. So there's angels, archangels, archai, called time spirits, and there's the Elohim, or spirits of form. Those spirits of form, there are seven major ones, and they work together to hold our solar system intact. The sun is one of them, and then the 6 planets, not considering the outer 3 planets. Those 6 planets and the sun create the 7 Elohim. The being of the moon is called Jehovah, who is one of the Elohim. But there's also fallen angels at all ranks. Just like Lucifer fell from the highest rank, literally the highest rank that of manifestation, the beings of thrones, the beings of willpower, Lucifer fell, but the Luciferic hosts have fallen throughout the entire 9 ranks of the hierarchy. And so when we're talking about this being of the sun that is the true Antichrist, Rudolf Steiner and others give the name Sorat or Soroth, S-O-R-A-T, or add an H to it, Soroth. That is truly the Antichrist. That being has yet to come, though will come in the future. And if things stay on the proper path that they were laid out in the original cosmology of the hierarchy, that being will not come for another 6,000 years, when we will see the war of all against all, and we will see the depictions given in the book of Revelation as the apocalypse happen in real life with human beings. But that is an evolution that is in the future. But Rudolf Steiner said that at this time, when Ahriman, this being of darkness, would take upon a human form, it would also be, unfortunately, a terrible opportunity for humanity to speed up evolution and to bring the apocalypse now, to bring the war of all against all 6,000 years early. And so the question then comes in looking at what Ahriman wants to do through his form of belief, which is called materialism or superstition science, as Rudolf Steiner refers to it in his lectures. Ahriman wants to take the materialism of science and use it to stay alive eternally as a human being, either augmented through machines. And some would say, therefore, that Ahriman wants to incarnate into the internet, or in all these ways that they have of basically taking imaginary scientific superstition, as it were, taking the consciousness of a human being, and they think it's in the brain, the scientists do, these secular humanist, materialistic, superstitious scientists believe that consciousness is in the brain, which of course it is not. The brain is a mirror that reflects the consciousness of the heart. But they believe that Ahriman will incarnate not only as a human, but incarnate into machines and stay alive eternally in the physical realm. This is the intent of this being, according to Rudolf Steiner and many others. So this question is basically now up in our face. The question is the incarnation of Ahriman really speaking about a super artificial intelligence that is machine-based, that then becomes the mechanical brain of the earth, the artificial intelligence of the earth that takes over human willpower by creating so many machines that do our work for us, that do our thinking for us, that are basically the source of our memory, the source of our basically our consciousness and the way it's projected. For instance, on the internet, through communications podcasts like this, we can reach the whole world. We can reach billions of people. So in fact, if Ahriman enters into that type of transhumanism, cyborg, wet works, can Ahriman literally complete his desired task, which is to not only live eternally in the physical world, but also take over the willpower and the spiritual nature of all human beings on the earth? We are now beginning to see that, at least as an imagination, a mechanical imagination, is something that seems to be imminent. So therefore, it's absolutely apropos that we discuss this, and we discuss it with not just the indications of Rudolf Steiner, but also the anecdotal remarks that he made to people and the little pieces that he's given us as a breadcrumb trail to lead to Ahriman. Now, we have written a story called Lucifer's Grail, which talks about this incarnation of Lucifer in approximately, well, what is considered to be the 3rd millennium BC. And we've written a story about that to kind of characterize what it was that happened then, because that might give us indications of what's happening now. We also have written a few articles where we make reference to the biography of Ahriman, and also what will be the failure of Ahriman's intent, his given task. And those slight articles I'm putting together all in one big package today so that we can get a perspective on that. So let's discuss for a minute the nature of the human being and these beings that will tempt you into evil, one being towards too much light and the other one towards too much darkness. But in between, there are other beings that work with Soroth, who are called the Asuras, and we'll discuss them also. So Rudolf Steiner is one of the only theologians that I know that say that there are two forms of evil at all times, one speaking in one ear and another speaking in another ear, and that another set of beings are literally attacking the human heart and the human consciousness. We know of Lucifer. We know of the war in heaven. We even know that there's the remnants of that war in heaven as the asteroid belt, and that constantly meteoric iron is coming down to the earth as gifts from this asteroid belt to remind us of the war in heaven so that we never forget it. Well, that war isn't just of the past. It's not such an ancient past that looks as if it's mythology or basically religious ideas that are not necessarily connected to the physical, but in fact they are. In the human being, you take up oxygen with iron, and it is meteoric iron that comes down into the water that we drink, into the food that we eat constantly. Tens of thousands of these meteoric iron particles enter into the atmosphere every day. And Rudolf Steiner says that that is the gift of the Archangel Michael. In other words, when God gave the Archangel Michael, his right hand, a sword or a spear, depending upon which version you're looking at, he used that, the Archangel Michael, to cast Lucifer out of heaven, rent the veil between heaven and the material world, and Lucifer fell down into this realm and has become the prince of this realm since that time. So, in fact, what you would call cosmic intelligence is the gift of Lucifer. But cosmic intelligence had to come to birth over a long period of time. So if we look back to 3000 BC or thereabouts, or between 2000 to 3000 BC, during what is called the third millennium BC, we find that Rudolf Steiner says there was a story told about Lucifer's incarnation as a human being. So though Lucifer was down in this realm, working in this realm, in the intelligence of humanity, humanity's intelligence was evolving over time. And it was Lucifer who wanted to give to humanity too much intelligence too early to destroy humanity and destroy the proper evolutionary progress of the spiritual development of mankind, of humankind. Well, this literally became a physical reality in a city called the city of Manu. So let's set aside for a moment the fact that Rudolf Steiner said that between the incarnation of the physical human being, Lucifer, in China, and the physical incarnation of Ahriman, a human devil, a human demon, in the West, he says there's 6,000 years. Well, that's one of the incongruencies that we must set aside if we're going to discuss this in any kind of sensible way. Rudolf Steiner only made, as far as I can tell in my studies, a few incongruent remarks. And one of them was exactly when was the incarnation of Lucifer, exactly when will be the incarnation of Ahriman. But let's take, for example, what he said about the planet Uranus. In 1909, he said that Uranus was a cometary aspect of Saturn that came off as a tail of Saturn and then congealed into a planet. After that point, he always makes reference to the outer three planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, as being more or less planetoids that joined our system, that they aren't truly part of our system. They have an effect in our system, our solar system, but in fact, the limits of our solar system actually end with the rings of Saturn. So one can get very upset about this. One can debate this. One can be very distraught at the fact that the Rudolf Steiner might not have been absolutely 100% consistent and perfect in everything he said. That's the reality. And then people will justify that by saying, well, it depends upon where he was standing when he was speaking about this. Was he speaking about the physical, the etheric, the astral, the soul realm, the spirit realm? All of those are good justifications for seeing that there could be inconsistencies in things that he says. But in this particular case, there's really no debating the fact that those are two different stories. And so there's no debating the fact that Rudolf Steiner said not a day of the third millennium, which is starting in 2000, would go by that Ahriman would not be incarnated in the West. Now, that's anecdotal remarks made to Christian community priests and others in helping them prepare for this reality. But we also know that starting in the 15th century, that the philosophy of Ahriman had already fallen from the heavens down to the earth and was taking over the thinking of mankind, of humankind, through what he calls superstitious science. And in fact, most science is simply theories that are supplanted on a very regular basis. So there is no true, absolute reality of science. That is a complete myth. As a matter of fact, myths are sometimes much truer than superstitious science. So when we speak about Lucifer incarnating, Steiner gives some very exacting details. He says that during the third millennium BC, Lucifer became a human being in the realm of the mystery center in what he calls the Central Asian Mystery Center. Now, this mystery center was where the being that we in Christianity call Noah, and in almost every tradition there is a person that is named that survived the flood, Deucalion in Greek, on and on and on, many different names. But let's just call this being in the ancient Hindu philosophy Manu. And Manu gave the laws of Manu, which were the religious instructions on how to handle rituals, how to handle death rituals, how to handle worship, how to handle the approach to the divine. So the laws of Manu weren't written down until much later, but they actually go back to about 10,500 BC. So when Manu came to this Central Asian Mystery Center in 10,000 BC, or 10,500 BC, thereabouts, at the eastern end of the Tarim Basin on what is now called the Lake Lop Nor, there was found, some 20 years ago, a city at that place. The very place that Rudolf Steiner pointed out would have been the city of Manu. And there was a replication of what had been the mystery temples of Atlantis. And in these mystery temples, from one cultural epoch after the next, there were messengers sent out first to India through the Brahmins, then to Persia, and then to the Mesopotamia area in Egypt, and then to Greece. And they all came from this mystery initiation center and this wisdom that was carried over by Manu and what were called the seven holy rishis. And there were 6 temples around a central temple, the Sun Temple, which was a replication of what had happened on the island of Atlantis, according to Rudolf Steiner and Scott Elliott and Blavatsky and Churchward and so many others. So Lucifer, as the story goes, according to Rudolf Steiner, incarnated in the vicinity of this mystery initiation center. Now, Manu incarnated again and again and again, many incarnations, one after the next, and of course recognized, like the Tibetan recognizes a Tulku or a reincarnated teacher, comes again. They see that this child is in fact that being. Well, this is the way that it happened back then. And Manu was the leader of this culture again and again and again for thousands of years. Well, during the time that Lucifer incarnated in this mystery initiation center, Lucifer was seen as being a very special person, but not until he grew a bit older, then they understood that he was supposed to be given all of the mystery wisdom that was available at the time. In general, at that time and previous to that, you might be initiated into one temple or the next, the temple of Mercury or the temple of Vulcan or the temple of Saturn or Jupiter or the temple of the sun. But Lucifer was incarnated and was given basically complete access to all of the 7 mystery initiation centers and the temples that were there at the Central Asian Mystery Initiation Center of the city of Manu. And that is because Lucifer, as you can imagine, being actually a hierarchical being that has fallen into an earthly realm, a sublunary realm, had great capacities for learning. So Lucifer learned all that there was to be given in those mystery initiation centers and took that wisdom. And as he became one of the major leaders of this mystery initiation center, he compiled it into writings. We're not exactly sure what kind of writings, but they were then put into libraries. And there were literally, according to Rudolf Steiner and others, a place called the White Island. And this was in the Gobi Desert, north of the Tarim Basin, north of Lop Nor Lake. And they were recorded there, and they're still there today. As a matter of fact, Halliburton found one of these pyramids because they are, in fact, pyramids. And by doing radar and satellite sounding, they found that there were literally 200 of these buildings underneath the sands of the Gobi Desert. They uncovered one of them and they buried it back again. Now, this may come as a shock, but there are dozens of pyramid cities in China proper and in Outer Mongolia that have yet to ever be discovered and yet have never been touched by the hand of an archaeologist. The largest pyramid in the world, the White Pyramid, is in the Forbidden Zone in China, and it has yet to be unearthed. It has yet, you can see pictures of it, but it has yet to be examined by archaeologists. And even the first leader of China, the Qin, the mythical emperor of Qin, that is where the terracotta sculptures were found in a pit next to the pyramid. Well, they have yet to open that pyramid. They have an inscription that states what's in it. They have their traditions, but the Chinese will not let them be opened. And the reason for that is because they will find that they are not Mongolian in origin and in source. They are Tarokian. They are Aryan. They came from Atlantis. And when you look at these pyramid cities, you will see that they are star clusters on the earth that when you look into the sky, they coincide with it. And the studies have been done on numerous of these Angkor Wat, the pyramids on the Giza Plateau, on and on and on. The megalithic structures, particularly these pyramid cities, reflect star clusters. And if you spin them back in time, they are all basically a time message. It's the message that when you spin them back and you find the true position of those star clusters, those constellations, when they would have been reflected onto the earth and built as a reflection of them, they all indicate one date, and that date is 10,500 BC, the time that so many people state was the last sinking of Atlantis, and when Manu, Noah, Deucalion left Atlantis and came to this Central Asian Mystery Initiation Center. So we have the evidence to show that the city was there. We have the evidence to show that the libraries are there. And then we have the stories of the Sun Monkey King, the generally considered to be the second oldest story in China. And the Sun Monkey King is a description of the incarnation of Lucifer, in my opinion. Some would say the mythical Emperor Yu would be that incarnation of Lucifer. It doesn't really matter. The point is that this is actually historical. Now, it is ancient history, but as we're finding out now, so many things that we believed couldn't have happened, like the city of Vrindavan, is 10,000 years, 10,000 BC. The Harappan culture has been dated back to 9,000 BC. So prehistory actually now is being found to be true. So a lot of the mythology or the stories from the ancient wisdom of the Hindus have now found to be quite literally true. Same thing with the stories of the Chinese. And these stories indicate that there was this great being who sent out to the four corners of the world, basically exploration groups who mapped the world and brought them back. So the oldest map you can find is the map of Lu, and it clearly shows the entire western coast of America from Alaska, all down through British Columbia, through America, through Central America, into South America, and they showed the animals, they showed the botany, the plants that were growing, and there were literally experiments that were done with certain trees along the western coast of North America and Canada and Alaska, all the way down to South America, where there was biological experiments. And what were those experiments about? They were about what Lucifer was all about. Lucifer and Ahriman have a similar intent. Lucifer wanted to figure out a way to live forever. And that is why so many of the Chinese kings, following along in the footsteps of Lucifer, drank mercury and ate mercury, which in fact shortened their lives and killed them. But Lucifer was attempting to find if there was a biological way to take in a substance that would give him eternal life here in the physical realm. Now, that sounds strange, but think of it. If you had all the greatest wisdom and intelligence, what is it that you, and power, and what we would call today money, what would you want to do with it? What do the billionaires of today's world want to do? They wish to live forever, no matter what it takes, even if it means taking their brain out and putting it in a machine. It doesn't matter. They want to live forever. And this desire is the ultimate Luciferic and Ahrimanic desire, because human beings only grow through repeated human incarnations. It is that process of sleeping in between and receiving the gifts of the cosmos in between incarnations that has everything to do with your spiritual evolution. Without that, you will not spiritually evolve. And Lucifer, of course, was already very evolved and fell down, fell backwards, as Rudolf Steiner calls it, became a being who was retarded in their development. The same thing with Ahriman. So Lucifer gained all the power and the wisdom of Manu and the ancient Atlanteans, as well as that which was disseminated into these cultural epochs that I've made reference to, and put it into this library, and it's still there to this very day. And this shows you that, in fact, this is not some mythology. This is a reality. Rudolf Steiner points out, and we put it in our article, that the wisdom of Lucifer, which was far in advance of what it should have been at the time. It wasn't until the Abrahamic age and Abraham that human beings started to have individual thinking. Until that time, they had a natural clairvoyance, atavistic clairvoyance, it's sometimes called. They had the capacity to look out into the world and to see the wisdom that was manifesting there and to be in direct communion with that. But they did not have personal individuality. They did not have individualized thinking, and they did not have freedom. This could only be instilled in human beings and given as a gift by the being of Christ at the mystery of Golgotha, at the turning point of time, when then human beings started to have free and independent thought that was so independent that human beings could separate them out and believe that they were not part of what in today's world is called intelligent design, or what we would call the divine world, or God or goddess, whatever it is you see this divine world as, and the beings who inhabit it, the 9 hierarchies, the Trinity. They didn't have the capacity to stand back and say, until that time, I am alone, I am separate, and I have to develop myself individually. That is the gift of Christ. Before that time, the wisdom that was pervasive throughout these ancient cultures was a Luciferic wisdom. It was a Luciferic intelligence, and it wished to speed humanity up in its development to the point that it destroyed humanity. The intent of Lucifer and Ahriman is to destroy the human I am, the human ego, to destroy human spiritual development. So when we wrote this story called Lucifer's Grail, we talked about these things in great detail only because we tried to make it something that could be understood in the feeling life and in the imagination and the inspiration and intuitive life of the human being in relationship to this. But the reality is that Lucifer is there every single time you wish to have a free thought, or to take a free thought and turn it into love, an action centered in the heart for the good of all. Lucifer would like to stop that. So Lucifer isn't just a being, some mythological being who incarnated in the 3rd millennium BC. Lucifer is present right now. According to Rudolf Steiner, when we work with the forces of the Holy Spirit, and according to neo-anthroposophy and the Gospel of Sophia, when you work with the being Anthroposophia, as Rudolf Steiner calls her, or the Holy Sophia, you are redeeming Lucifer. You are taking cosmic wisdom and turning it into something that is applicable out of the human free will to apply love in the world. And that is the antidote. Lucifer, like all evil, will be redeemed. Lucifer, in the end, will have served a purpose, but that purpose was, unfortunately, misguided, misdirected, and wishes to lead us astray. But Rudolf Steiner spoke in his lectures about the fact that the gifts of Lucifer then became the wisdom of what we know as gnosis, or the Gnostic wisdom. It also became the art of the Greeks. It became the intelligence that led the Dionysian artificers to be able to build the Greek temples, or to be able to build the ancient Indian Hindu temples. This type of wisdom was literally absorbed through natural clairvoyance at that time, but eventually became codified and became Gnosticism. Now, Steiner points out that the gift of Lucifer is that in Gnosticism, because when we look at the Gnostics, what are they? They are the wisdom of all the ancient cultures that have been distilled down into something that could then be handled by a thinking, individualized human being with free will and the ability to direct love out of free will. So the Gnostics, what we would find is the texts that filled the Library of Alexandria, incredible wisdom. It speaks a lot about Sophia, as a matter of fact, but also about Christ. There are many gospels that didn't make it into our canonically accepted gospels that are in the Bible. There are many, 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 many other ones. And when you read them, they're filled with incredible wisdom, but you can see that they are what you might call discarnate. They aren't really practical, and you know that they are not the truth. They're telling stories about Jesus of Nazareth and Mary and the apostles and all these different beings that were something experienced by natural clairvoyance in the ancient past, but were not the reality that the human now experiences in our present time. So these beings described by Lucifer then became a foundation for being able to understand the nature of Jesus Christ, particularly the nature of Christ in relationship to the Trinity. As Rudolf Steiner points out, without the Luciferic wisdom being carried over into Gnosticism, we would not be able to understand the nature of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Because to understand that the Father and the Son are separate and equal, and then there's the Holy Spirit, which is a third separate but equal, combined and yet separate, what you're dealing with is a paradox. The human mind cannot handle a paradox in the physical world. That is the reason that the duality of the physical world confounds the human being. How could there be a duality between physical matter and spiritual matter, which is the place from which physical matter emanated? Spiritual matter, spiritual thought, whether you call it cosmic electricity or wisdom or the wisdom in light, as it descends, it then becomes a duality in this physical world. So just to imagine, remember that in the past there were pantheons, there were groups of gods. The ancient Hindus believed in Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, a trinity. And then they all had their consort, their wife, which were actually higher than they were all created by a being named Vak, or the Word. or speech or sound. So all of a sudden, unless you can comprehend multiple beings all at once, you wouldn't be able to comprehend the nature of the divine inside of yourself. But we are a being that is a trinity, a being of thinking, feeling, and willing, just in this world of duality. But we also have three natures to our soul and three natures to our spirit. So we are spirit, soul, and physical. That is the gift of Lucifer, to be able at one time to handle a double paradox or even a triple paradox, that one thing is another, but it is not. And that is the basis of the ancient Indian teachings of the Upanishads, is that there is the Brahman outside of us and the Atman inside. They are separate, but they are one. And so when you see these philosophical approaches, these are approaches that were given by the ancient wisdom of Lucifer. And that is why when we look at the teachings of the ancient Hindus, whether it be the Vedas, the Puranas, or whatever it is that you wish to study, you're going to find that they sound extremely foreign to the Western mind, because the Western mind is now, unfortunately, underneath the hypnotic effect of superstitious science, which tries to say that there is no duality and that there's no merging of the duality. So without Lucifer, without that ancient cosmic wisdom, it would be impossible for us to actually ascertain the true nature of the spirit in the physical world. So that is Lucifer in the past. And one can look at the remnants of this wisdom, one can look at the remnants of these traditions and begin to get a bit of a picture. But without balancing that out, let us say that Lucifer is your left hand and speaking into your left ear, but your right hand and your right ear is being told something completely different by this being who wants to say, oh, there's no duality in the world. There's only one world. There's only one materialistic world. And there is no life after death. There was no life before death. There is no such thing as the human being divine or having even a divine part. There's no thing, no real substance or no thing that we would call the soul. There's no spirit. That's what Ahriman is saying to us. And this started in 1415 AD, in the 15th century, when materialistic science started to say that when we create a theory as a scientist, and I like to call them secular humanists because then they really don't believe in anything spiritual and they're secular, but in fact, what do? They create a religion of science. Settled science, they call it in today's world. It's settled science. There's never ever been settled science. Every single theory of science is supplanted, and it has to be thrown away in usually about less than 100 years. And then what do? The scientists play like all along they knew what it is that they have now discovered. And then they take their old theories and they hide them away. And the only people who get to see them are the children in school who are being given textbooks on science that are so outdated that it is astounding. Even the motion of the planets around the sun now, its true motion is known. That does not reach down into science that is taught in any school or any college, any university, anywhere. Because the compartmentalization of science is what Ahriman loves to do. Ahriman, this being, this ancient Persian being of darkness, wants to basically separate things out into compartments that do not speak to one another, that do not connect to one another. In other words, separate pieces of information that attempt to stand alone as absolute truth. Well, this is in fact something that never happens in the physical world. As Rudolf Steiner always points out, there is no such thing as knowledge that stands alone. It must be connected to other components that then create a larger picture for the human being to find the true nature of how it is that we merge our understanding of the physical world with also the spiritual world from which it emanated. And Ahriman would like to tell us there's only a cold, dead coffin awaiting you, that you did not come from a previous incarnation, that there was no life before you were born, that you are nothing more than the merging of a sperm and an egg, and that these are just processes that just came to be without any intelligence guiding them, without any consciousness guiding them, without any direction of any higher beings, and that we as human beings will not evolve beyond a hairless ape. Social Darwinism, evolution, that we supposedly came out of a soupy mud that was struck by lightning that just magically manifested human DNA, that then evolved and came out of the water as a reptile, as an amphibian, and then evolved into the human being. Complete and absolute nonsense. But that's what Ahriman will tell us. And if Ahriman's materialism, which is speaking into our right ear, to ignore everything that has to do with the eternal nature of the human being that is found in the human heart and in human consciousness, then what do you have? You have a cold, dead universe that is nothing more than a clock that is ticking down to a death of entropy. In other words, there's no levity, there's no ectropy, there's no how do the plants rise up towards the sun? All of these things would be explained by superstitious science through Ahriman. And Ahriman would then try to convince us also that Lucifer doesn't exist. But then Lucifer would like to say to us, oh, leave the earth and just come up with me into the light-filled realms where you will excarnate and have nothing to do with bringing love or free will into the world to give to other people. In other words, you are alone, according to both Lucifer and Ahriman, and they don't want to talk to one another. And one of their curses is they cannot see the middle realm where Christ is in your heart. They cannot see Christ because for a time they have been cast into this realm and they are evil, but evil is the word live spelled backwards. So when you are working against life, against living, that is evil. And when you believe that there is only your human waking consciousness, then you have abnegated your connection to the dream world, to your soul, to your spirit, to love that can be transferred and flowing through you and given to others, and their love given back to you through the connections that go beyond the realm of death. There's no reincarnation, repeated human incarnations. There is nothing. The answer to the question of what is this all about, according to Lucifer and Ahriman, would be nothing. It's about nothing. Now, if they can convince you of that, particularly if Ahriman in our age through materialism can convince you of that, then the future beings who work with Soroth, this sun demon, Soroth, this Antichrist being who works out of the realm of the sun and is yet to come to the earth, works through the beings called the Asuras. Well, there are millions and millions and billions of Asuras. And every single time that you give up your willpower to a machine, or you give up your human intelligence to artificial intelligence, the Asuric beings come in and eat a part of your ego. They eat a part of your divine I am. And so in the realm of the heart, where Christ, of course, exists, and later Soroth wants to find his home, the Asuras are eating us alive as we give ourselves over to either the Luciferic thoughts, the Ahrimanic thoughts, or these thoughts of nothingness, this nihilism, this philosophy that there is nothing. And then what does that lead to? The ultimate form of materialism. And when that happens, you will never be able to see beyond the physical world. So Lucifer tries to entrance you. We have a physical body, an etheric body, also called the life body, and an astral body, which is the body of stars. Astral is a star, stars. So the starry forces ray into us, and those are what give our thinking the ability to perceive and to attempt to understand. But there's a higher form of thinking, there's a higher form of feeling, and there's a higher form of willing. Lucifer is attacking us in our thinking. The Asuras are attacking us in our feeling, and Ahriman is attacking us in our will. So when our will has become stultified, when it's become deadened, when it's become weak, and we give away our willpower, which is really the driving force of love that comes out of the cosmos, comes out of the sun, comes out of the planets, and feeds us. When those three forces start to attack us, Lucifer attacks us in our thinking. Ahriman wants to deaden our heart and work with the Asuras. So already Ahriman's intentions since the 15th century was to turn materialism into a philosophy that steals our emotions. It steals the feelings of love that arise from our will. And Soroth will eventually, through the heart, enter into the human will and steal all aspects of the ability for the human being to evolve spiritually. So we have three forces working at once, not just Lucifer and Ahriman, but we have the Asuras who are trying to prepare the ground for Soroth, and Ahriman, who is trying to incarnate right now, and in my opinion, certainly Ahriman is already incarnated as a human being. We even know, some people believe that they know where Ahriman incarnated and how and through what forces they have been working since that incarnation. Rudolf Steiner says that this being will incarnate and just be given a simple common name, and some insinuate through anecdotal remarks that it will happen in the northwest area of North America, where by necessity east must meet west. What does that mean? What does that anecdotal remark of Steiner to the Christian community priests mean? It means that by necessity the west, Ahriman and Ahriman's incarnation, must meet the east, Lucifer's incarnation, in America, where the willpower of the human being is stronger than it has ever been in human history. Americans are an incredible driving will force. We have more freedoms than most cultures have had throughout all of history, ancient and otherwise. And so, if we are to believe that this incarnation of Ahriman is happening now, then we can see that Ahriman would like to tell all of us that we can do the same thing. As a matter of fact, Ahriman's gift right now is to endow people with what they think is a clairvoyant understanding of the world. But the problem will be is that each individual who has been given this gift by Ahriman will think that their view of using their clairvoyance is the only truth that there is. And so you can see this happening with the hundreds of religions, hundreds of cults, hundreds and thousands of different understandings and philosophical views of what people think is actually going on. And unfortunately, you will find very few of them that coincide, very few of them that will agree. And this is the confusion that Ahriman is trying to create. And also to entice us to use our mechanical devices, our digital electronic devices, to use 5G, 1G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5G, 6G, to use all these mechanical devices, this materialistic, superstitious science, as a way to make us feel as if we are human gods on earth that will live forever. As a matter of fact, you hear it all the time. The scientists say, oh, we now know how we're going to be able to extend human life for hundreds of years. And eventually in the future, you will simply decide whether you wish to die or not, or that you could then pass your consciousness into another vehicle, a transhuman vehicle, a cyborg vehicle, whatever it is. These are all mythologies. So much of science is simply superstitious. It is not based in reality. There really is no artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence are millions of subroutines written by human intelligence. There really is no quantum machines, and there never will be. And there really is no chance for Ahriman to complete his desired task, which is to live forever in a physical body or in an augmented physical body here in the physical world, just like Lucifer's desire to live forever, though in fact there were incredible things created by Lucifer and his followers. Lucifer did not live forever. He lives in a realm that is a non-material realm, but did incarnate as a human being once and only once. And on the other end of that spectrum, Ahriman is now incarnating at the balance point. And you can debate the years and Steiner's remarks about the 6,000 years between, or whether there's 4,000 years between. But in the middle, Christ incarnated in the mystery of Golgotha. And that is the gift that is eternal. We are eternal beings. It is Luciferic mythology, Ahrimanic nonsense to think that we should do this physically. We are eternal beings if we take up our Christ himself. In other words, if our soul can develop an I am that can consciously go beyond the threshold of death and return again through repeated human incarnations, we are eternal. That is the gift of Christ. So when they say Christ conquered death, well, Christ came to bring eternal life. But what is that eternal life? To realize the point of human spiritual evolution, which is that human beings are eternal. Now, only parts of us are eternal, and that might be very sad to some people to hear that. But if you haven't brought your free will into love through service of others, then you really aren't developing your eternal nature. But if you have, that lives beyond the threshold of death, and it comes back again. Ahriman and Lucifer do not have that because they are cursed with not being able to see Christ. They cannot see the eternal divine I am in the human being, though they wish to consume all other aspects of the being that would build to create that eternal I am and eat you and eat the parts of you, your physical, your soul, your spiritual parts, for themselves, to consume them. And that's what the Asuras do. The Asuras literally consume parts of us so that by the time Soroth, the true Antichrist, incarnates in 6,000 years, that the human being will be nothing more than a hollow shell that can be then inhabited by this anti-being of the sun, this Antichrist. So there is no absolute solution to the debate about what Rudolf Steiner gave us as indications concerning the incarnation of Ahriman. But because he told us the following, that Ahriman will work through materialism, that Ahriman will essentially work through a literal interpretation of the Gospels or the teachings about Jesus Christ, that, as you know, there are hundreds and thousands of religions who all debate using the same Bible. The Hebrews, the Muslims, and the Christians all use the same holy text, and they all have divergent opinions. This is an image of what Ahriman has done to make people believe that their view is the only view. And this, of course, is really the teachings of the Antichrist, the teachings of anti-love. So we must balance Lucifer and Ahriman in our lives. We must make decisions with our willpower through the freedom of love that then dispel the power of the Asuras to enter into us, to prepare us as a ground for the war of all against all, for the apocalyptic vision of the future, which, if you look closely at the apocalypse in the book of Revelation, you'll find that it is a great story of victory and of joy and of love. It's just that the path to get there is a long, hard path where we must decide whether we will follow the design of Lucifer, the design of Ahriman, or the design of Soroth, the Antichrist. And that is where human freedom resides. And that is why it is imperative at this time, when the human being is being assaulted, that we find that higher ego, the higher I am in ourselves, that demonstrate that we are in fact divine beings.